I'm often astonished by life's little coincidences. It's been over 10 years now since it happened. I remember because I was making last-minute preparations for the 100th anniversary of the sinking of the Titanic. As head of the Denver chapter of the Titanic Society, not only was I responsible for organising the anniversary, but my plumbing business was going gangbusters. It had been a cold winter, and now, with the thaw, there had been a recent spate of burst water pipes. I was swamped. It was 10 p.m. The phone rang out of nowhere and woke me up with a start. Earlier that day, I had just set my ringtone to Nearer My God to Thee to honour the upcoming anniversary. Hearing that tune in the middle of the night made me think that might not have been such a good idea after all. I got up to switch on the light before answering the call. Hello, Jim here. How can I help? I'm about to drown, said a surprisingly matter-of-fact female voice. Sorry? I'm about to drown. I need your help. Do you have any broken pipes? No. Then I think you have the wrong number, ma'am. You are Jim Carruthers? Yes, ma'am. Then I have the right number. Who is this? My name is Mrs. Brown. Okay, Mrs. Brown, why me? You left your calling card at my place. So? Well, even without meeting someone, I can tell about people. It's a gift I have. Call it insight. I see things and I know things. Things from the past and the present and the future. Such as? I'm drowning, Mr. Carruthers. Every time I look into the water basin on my side table, I shiver. In the bowl, I see a maelstrom, an endless stream of water pouring into my room. I'm locked in with no chance of escape. I will drown. Although I am a strong woman, I can't manage to open the door. I need you, Mr. Carruthers. Please don't be offended, but surely these are just bad dreams. And it's late. No, I've had visions like these before. It's my future, Mr. Carruthers. I've seen it and I don't like it. Please help me. I rubbed my forehead and looked down at the practical, long-wearing, blue-grey carpet in my bedroom of my bachelor pad. When will these things you see take place? I'm not exactly sure, but I know it's soon, possibly within days. I was a sucker for a damsel in distress, even though this one seemed rather self-composed and independent. To be honest, I was confused, but also a little curious. It's late, I'm busy at the moment, and I'm not really sure how I can help, but I'll come round tomorrow if I get a chance. What's the address? Oh, thank you, Mr. Carruthers. I knew I had the right person. I live at 1340 Pennsylvania Street, Denver. A shiver went up my spine. That was impossible. It couldn't be. Mrs. Brown? 1340 Pennsylvania Street, Denver? I looked up at the calendar. April 14th, 2012 was circled in red. That was less than 3 days away. Are you who I think you are, Mrs. Brown? There was no response. The phone had gone dead. 2 days till the disaster. I rock up at the address the next morning and confirm what I already knew. This was the home of Margaret Tobin, better known as the Unsinkable Molly Brown, a socialite, philanthropist, and survivor of the Titanic disaster. It was now a museum in her honour, and there was not a resident in sight. The thought that Mrs. Brown had rung me from this address the previous night seemed ludicrous in the light of day. Then I realised what was going on. I should have picked it up from the start. Facepalm. I smiled. I could imagine Jane, Beale and Ahmed back at the Titanic Society having a good old belly laugh. Nice one, guys. I hadn't recognised any of their voices, but that wasn't surprising. I was terrible at voices. It wasn't the best way to start the day, but I didn't have much time to think about it. My days were full of taking phone calls, fixing broken pipes, and organising the Titanic memorabilia, the centrepiece of our coming celebration. So that night I went to bed looking forward to a restful sleep. I was woken again, 10 p.m. Hello, Jim here. When are you coming to help me? Listen, lady, a joke's a joke. I'm tired. Let me get some sleep. This is no joke, Mr. Carruthers. I so fear drowning. These premonitions of a watery grave have me flustered. I'm a sensible woman of independent means, but I am disturbed, and I need a kind soul I can rely on to be there when the time comes. Someone who's good with their hands and knows what to do in a crisis. There are some things even I can't do. Enough's enough, Molly, if that's your real name. The first time was funny, but this time it's just a little annoying. Don't call me Molly, I'm Mrs. Brown. I must have misread you, Mr. Carruthers. You seem a little testy tonight. I must admit, this did worry me a bit. She sounded sincere and earnest, and it certainly wasn't the kind of thing my colleagues would say to me, even if they were playing a practical joke. Sorry, Mrs. Brown, I've had a hard day. I went around to see you today, but you weren't there. Don't lie to me. I spent the whole day waiting in the front room, and no one arrived all day. You must have the wrong address. I assure you, Mrs. Brown, it was your house, 1340 Pennsylvania Street, Denver. No one was there. No one has lived there for a very long time. Please don't play games with me, Mr. Carruthers. If no one was there, then where have I been? I can assure you I know my own home, even if I only have been there a few months. I need your help. Please don't ring any more, Mrs. Brown. I don't mean to trouble you, Mr. Carruthers. I am a wealthy woman. I can make it worth your while. I hung up. Practical jokes, scams, crazy old ladies, didn't matter. I just wanted some sleep. One day till the disaster. While checking my bank account the next morning, I found an extra $1,000, a deposit waiting for clearance by the bank. I was curious, and after some phone calls and investigation, I discovered, much to my surprise, that it had been deposited into my account by Mrs. Brown. Clearly, this was no longer a joke. None of my colleagues would go to this extreme, and no scammer would do this. Moreover, Mrs. Smith had made it obvious she was serious and not a time waster after all. But what could I do? She didn't exist, at least not in my time period anyway. That night I got a call again, 10 p.m. This time she had my attention. Did you get the money? Yes, but I'm confused. What's the money for? I told you I need your help and I'm willing to pay for it. Trust me, Mrs. Brown, you'll be fine. You're strong and independent, and I know for a fact you live a long and productive life. You're a survivor. You are right, Mr. Carruthers. I am a survivor, but I still need help. These premonitions are getting worse. A disaster is about to happen. I can feel it in my bones. I fear I only have a few days left. Seriously, Mrs. Brown, I know about these things. You have nothing to worry about. And even if I wanted to, I can't help you. And please don't send any more money. I know you are an expert, Mr. Carruthers, but I am telling you, I need help. You might think I've lived an extravagant life in luxurious surroundings, but it doesn't make a jot of difference to the dead what kind of coffin they're buried in. And I imagine drowning is a most terrible way to die. You don't die, Mrs. Brown. How do you know? Well, let's just say I can see into the future too. But you don't even know me. Believe me, I know you far more than you realise, Molly. Why do you call me Molly? Sorry, force of habit. It's what people call you in the future, Mrs. Brown. Well, we're not in the future, are we? My name is Mrs. Brown. Sorry, Mrs. Brown, you are right. You're not in the future. You're in the past. That's why I can't help you. This is complete nonsense. But I don't have time to argue. There's another $1,000 in it for you if you come around tomorrow. She hung up. I took a breath. My head hurt, so a couple of tablets and then I tried to get some sleep. My dream was filled with images of Mrs. Brown rowing Lifeboat 6. In the background I could see the lurching hull of the Titanic in its death plunge. But it was the screams of the hundreds of souls being stabbed to death so painfully by the cold that disturbed me the most. That sound, above all else, was the horror of that night, the night of the disaster. The night of the disaster. I had no plans to run this fool's errand for a long deceased Mrs. Brown. I was too busy with all the last-minute preparations for the anniversary. Phone calls here, conversations there. Joe was sick and couldn't do his Captain Smith speech. Frank was having trouble with his computer and needed a backup plan for his PowerPoint presentation. Catering was having trouble sourcing just the right kind of beef for the first-class meal for the guests. I didn't even have a moment to think about chasing up anything else. The show started at 10:30 p.m. to set the scene for the sinking of the iceberg striking of the iceberg and the sinking at 2:20 a.m. As it was, after all the last-minute resolutions, I only had half an hour to shower, shave and dress before I had to be out the door to make it on time. So it was that half an hour later I was flying out the door when the phone rang. 10 p.m. again. "It's happening, Mr. Carruthers. I have water all over me. It's consuming me. I'm going to drown. I just know it. Please save me." But it wasn't time. Even accounting for the difference in time zone. It wasn't time, not yet. It wouldn't happen for a few more hours. Why was Mrs. Brown calling anyway? Besides, she was never in her cabin the night the ship sank. It's all wrong. Nothing made sense. Even when I considered the impossibility of the whole thing, it was all wrong. Indeed, it was all wrong. I paused on the veranda as the realization dawned. How stupid and blind I've been. So focused on the anniversary, I missed what was plainly in front of my face, and there's no excuse for my stupidity. I listed the facts in my head. She never actually said she was on the ship. I put a refusal of the name of Molly down to vanity, but it wasn't Molly. She never cared what others thought of her. Maybe her name wasn't Molly after all. And then she kept saying I was lying, and nothing I said made sense. Now I realized nothing I said made sense because it wasn't true. She wasn't a voice from the past. She was very much alive and living here and now, and desperately needed my help, not because I was an expert on the Titanic, but because I was a plumber. Suddenly things started to fall into place, and I knew exactly what I had to do. I just hoped it wasn't too late. I arrived at the home of Mrs. Brown. I could hear the shouting, "Help! Help!" "I'm here, Mrs. Brown." The door to the basement was jammed, but I managed to pry it open. Water from the pipes burst out. "Thank you. I knew you'd come. Even when you didn't believe me and ignored the money, I knew deep down inside you would come." "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I should have been here for you. I should have believed you and followed through. Somehow, I can't help my imagination get the better of me." "Well, at least you're here now." "I know, but next time, it would be a good idea to give the right address. 1340 South Pennsylvania Street, Denver." "South Pennsylvania Street? Really? Well, I never knew. No wonder it's having so much trouble with the post. I never thought such a small word could make such a difference. In your case, Mrs. Brown, life and death." She smiled. "From now on, just call me Molly."